What's going on, everybody? Lumberjack Landlord here, and we are just here having a blast. Dion and I get a message from Millennial Mike, and he says, "Hey, I got a thing got coming up, and I want to talk about it." And so anytime one of the boys says, "Hey, I want to talk about it," and then he goes, "Yeah, you can make it live too." I'm like, "Okay." And then Dion's like, "Sure, let's make it live." So we're going to have a conversation tonight about pro and anti-landlord conversation, which is, should landlords exist or should they not? So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. This is going to be essentially an open debate between Millennial Mike and Dion, who is going to take, Dion's going to take the negative side, shocker. And he is going to play devil's advocate. And then I'm supposed to, I guess, create a level of decorum here. I don't know why you picked me to do that, but I will be making sure that unfair punches are rewarded and scored, and we will make sure that we kind of get to the end of this and have that conversation. And even all being landlords, I think one of the things that we do really well is we take the other side of it. We understand where our tenants are coming from, and we try and put ourselves in their shoes, and that's what makes us really good landlords. But without further ado, Mike, go ahead and kick us off, sir.
Sure. So for those of you who are just getting on right now, the whole idea behind this conversation was I'm going to be debating on a debate YouTube channel that usually live streams to several hundred people. The topic of landlords versus anti-landlords, or I think she titled it Landlord versus Overlord, or Landlord or Overlord. The idea is I'm going to go have a formal debate. I'm going to have an opening statement. We're going to go back and forth in some timed rounds. Then we'll have an open dialogue. Then they're going to open it up to a panel discussion where she invites on other people from the audience to complain or argue with me, or complain or argue with the other person that's debating. So I said, before I go out there and represent this community, I should probably bring it to the Knights of the Round Table right here, the real estate round table, and see if we couldn't kick this thing around for a little bit. And I figured that Matt just wouldn't be able to convincingly play a socialist, whereas Dion loves to say things like, I love Obamacare, it's free healthcare. So I figured he'd do a better job of being a convincing socialist. So anyways, obviously we're all landlords. I'd love to go ahead and start with like some type of brief opening statements, maybe 2 minutes, make your case. Dion, if you want to go first, or me, I don't care.
Well, I'm not going to let you do that. The idea with this is to prepare you for a debate on a channel where the moderator is going to we need to watch the channel. So prepare yourself, see how the debates happen, see if it is opening statement, arguments, tete-a-tete, closing statements, or if it's just statement, defend. And there will be people who log into the middle of this video who hear me making the arguments that I'm going to, who are just going to think I'm insane. Or we're going to see comments that think I'm a genius and you're insane because they just hate you. So I'll just start with a really simple one. Landlords are social parasites that actually contribute nothing to society. Try to debunk that. Literally, there is an imbalance of power. The person who owns the thing that somebody else needs is a basic human right, that right to shelter, and you are providing it for a profit.
Yeah, so right out of the gate, Dion's touching on a couple of the different emotional arguments that you always hear. Well, it's a basic human right. How could you possibly want to profit off of someone's basic human rights? To which I would say, well, we need to have a philosophical conversation about whether you're upset with landlording or whether you're upset with a profit-based business model. Because there's other basic human rights on Maslow's hierarchy of needs that are even more basic than shelter. And that would be food, and that would be water. So do you feel the same way about a grocery store or a restaurant or a utility company providing water? Or do you uniquely harbor some sort of ill feelings towards people who are profiting on shelter? So which one of it is it, Dion? Are you totally against any business model that profits on basic human rights or just housing alone?
Yeah.
Way impartial there, Matt. But so Mike, great answer. Attacked emotional versus the logical, right? Mm-hmm. You'll never win the debate, logic against emotions.
It's true.
An answer, if that trips you up and they just come back with, okay, your facts mean nothing to my emotions, you can throw in the, well, we have a right to bear arms, so the government should give me a free gun.
Right. Right.
That's not how rights work, and that's not how rights work too. So the next thing, let's say you do believe in a profit-based system, and you say, okay, it's the same as eating at a restaurant. It's the same as buying a car. These are things that you need: transportation, food, healthcare. Somebody's going to profit off of it. How about this business model marginalizes the middle class and attacks the working family? Because the people who live on the system benefit from the $32 billion spent on Section 8 last year. And the people who have significant amount of money can buy the properties to be rented out. They can buy all cash. They can be the Dave Ramsey people that have saved up millions and buy several properties for $300,000-$400,000 each. So really the only renters they have left is the government or the people who work to make money to support their family, who have to give, in most cases, 50% of their take-home pay. You take out the taxes, you take out the union stuff, you take out their health care, you take out what they're saving for retirement. Half of what they make that's left, only the working class. The people who don't work, who live on Section 8 BFED, child daycare subsidies, all of those social programs are going to benefit because the government pays for it, which is taxed from the middle class, because the wealthy can understand the tax code enough to not pay taxes on hundreds of thousands of income if they know how it works. And so really, like a law enforcement officer that I heard one time that doesn't like to write tickets because the only people who actually end up paying it is the middle class. The poor person, they don't care. They're not going to pay the fines. The wealthy person can afford the attorney to get out of the fines. But that working class family that's just trying to exist ends up paying their speeding ticket. They can't take the time to go to court. They can't take the time to hire an attorney, or they don't have the funds to hire an attorney. So they end up paying that ticket. Why should somebody be able to buy a house because they have enough money to do it, and somebody else should be able to get the house for free because they don't make enough money because they don't put any time, energy, or effort? And yes, there are some disabled people, handicappable people who need those benefits, or people who go through a rough period of time, 2 years or so, recovering from something where a social program should help them get back on their feet. But there are millions of people who just live on the system for decades, leaving only that working class family that you, the predatory leech of a landlord that provides nothing for society, is profiting off only one class of citizens.
Well, great. I mean, Dion really just shotgunned me with about 50 different points right there. And what I want you as the audience to do is to be able to see through all of, once again, the emotional arguments that are being made here and actually get to the root of the problem. He's correct where he says the middle class is going to feel the effects of rent more because the lower income classes like Section 8, people who live on welfare, well, it's taxpayers that are subsidizing it. And the wealthy have enough money to either buy or rent without any harm to them, any financial harm or burden to them. But ultimately, again, you're making a system-wide complaint about the way that our wealth, even this sounded more like an argument against people who are abusing the welfare state or having more stringent requirements on people there than it did against landlords. Ultimately, the service, the value, to your original statement where you said they provide no value to the system, the value that a landlord is providing is the fact that in almost every single market in the country and at almost any time, it's always cheaper to rent than to buy. Not always, but almost always. And so what does a landlord do? They offer an opportunity for someone to live in a community that they wouldn't otherwise be able to afford. It also offers a transition from being an 18-year-old living at home with mom and dad to being a 33-year-old, which is the average age of first-time home ownership. If we had a thought experiment where we said tomorrow it's illegal to rent property or rent from a landlord, and all landlords were now made illegal. Well, what do the people who are between the age of 18 and 33 do to get housing? Are they just stuck with mom and dad? Even if prices came down by forcing landlords to flood the markets with their properties, there would still be millions of Americans who don't qualify to buy housing, either because their income isn't high enough, they can't save the down payment, they don't have the credit, or they don't have the job history. Where do those people go? So the value that landlords provide to the system, it's a quality of life value. You'll hear the argument made often that they don't manufacture anything, so they don't produce anything of real value to the market. Well, but neither does someone who cuts my hair or a masseuse or any other quality of life improvement services. They're service-based industries. And so, yes, some of the middle class are going to get caught up in a system where they perpetually rent. Just like, as rare as it is, people in their 40s and 50s do still make minimum wage. But that's not the norm. The norm is, and always has been, at some point in your life, you're going to move up the economic scale to a point where you are at home ownership. And that's when you start to build real wealth. And landlording, the way that it's currently done in the United States today, does not prevent people from getting to that point in their life. It actually assists them in transitioning from living at home with your parents to home ownership.
Oh, the cesspool of crap I had to wade through to come up with these arguments to help you with your debate.
Sorry, man.
All right. So the next thing that you're not going to be able to prove wrong, because I don't think you've fixed my emotional state with any of your rebuttals today, is you said it yourself. You said people will bring up landlords don't do anything. That person cutting your hair went to cosmetology school, learned 500,000 things about coloring nails that they might never do, and just become a barber. And they spent $21,000 in 11 months in training, and then they're actually standing there on their feet to cut your hair. The masseuse, the person who went to massage therapy school, is standing on their feet, massaging you, treating your body. The landlord didn't construct it. That was construction companies. The landlord didn't even fund the original. That was the lending institutions. The landlord doesn't maintain it. They hire handymen, contractors, plumbers, and electricians to maintain the thing. What is the service? What is the benefit from having the landlord that couldn't be provided by something like the government, a social program, or the $32 billion that goes out in the Section 8 program almost every year would build a lot of houses?
So I would be, so one of the things that I think that you can help is, so tell me all the things that you believe government does really well.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And then the idea is, and what we want to do.
I have a list.
Let's hear it.
I understand, but I'm not finished my point. So shut it. I'm the
it.
arbitrator. Shut up. No, geez. So I think,
get out of here.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the key is that they're the same people that bitch and complain about what the government does, but they get their check on the 1st or the 15th or whatever that looks like for them. But I think, again, at the end of the day, we have to decide if we're in a free society and we're in a capitalist society, you get to choose whether to win or to lose. This is not, your choice is not made for you. Socialism pulls winners down and lifts losers up. That's what socialism does, to make us all equal and have the same outcomes. But what people don't understand
I don't know that it lifts anyone up. I think it just drags everybody down to the same level.
Right. But it lifts a loser up, because a loser, if they're not working and they're doing nothing and they're not, like, they're getting something, and that something is more than they would have been getting, which was nothing. So it does lift them up. It just doesn't lift them up nearly as much as it brings the achievers and the contributors down. Granted, I mean, at this point, I'm actually just going to make people angry at me because I win neener. But again,
my emotions are way more important than your facts.
Yeah, I understand. But I think at its core, I think the conversation, you're not going to get a fair shake. You're not getting a fair shake. There's no way
I can rebut the question of, tell me the thing that the government's ever done good, because I know that everybody who says facts matter, say go to the DMV, see how it's like. But is everyone in France speaking German? Did our government take? But
they don't have the French to thank for that. They have the Americans to thank for that.
The American government that supplied the military force that worked in conjunction with several other countries whose governments put troops on the line, defending the rights of other people, coming up with a constitution that protects our ability to say anything, and then that Second Amendment, just in case the first one doesn't work out. But did we, with the stroke of a pen, take millions of illegal immigrants coming into the United States and drop it by 98% by just having an executive order? The government can do some amazing things. So maybe we just need a government where we have the right checks and balances in place to create a social program that creates housing, instead of the least effective way, a profit-based system that takes billions and trillions of borrowed dollars that have to be paid back by that middle-class working family in the future.
Dion, you say least effective way. That's an assertion. That's a subjective opinion. Can you elaborate on why you claim that's the least effective way? What are you comparing it against?
Okay, first I'll go with fact, then I'll go with my argument. Fact, socialism killed hundreds of millions of people, a lot less houses needed. That's the fact. But here's the emotional response. There are countries that have social programs that have free healthcare, And you can go Switzerland and
Mhm.
Sweden and a couple of these places that I hope are countries and not cities or something stupid, because I went to a school in America and we don't learn that stuff.
You're right. So far, good.
Okay. So yeah, it's high taxes, but you also have social programs where you don't have the homeless program because you have homes provided.
So once again, Dion really seems to be making larger and more broad brush stroke criticisms of the economic system that we live in, and not just specifically landlords. He could maybe bring up a few examples of these property ownership rights exacerbating the problem. But the problem that he talks about are these system-wide economic problems. If you ever want to have a larger debate on the merits of capitalism versus socialism, we can. But for this particular argument, we're talking specifically about landlords owning property and the problems created there. You mentioned that, well, maybe what we could do is move away from the incredibly ineffective system we have in place right now, where private landowners are renting and profiting off of these poor middle class and lower income classes. And his suggestion was to, and he almost threw up when he said it himself, move that towards the government. And then we moved into this conversation about whether or not the government's good at anything. I would say maybe you can find some things that the government is good at, although I'd be very surprised if someone taking an anti-landlord socialist position is going to bring up the military as the example. I don't think that they would ever do that. But what I think that you need to do is ask yourself, is the government good at holding the government accountable? And my question would be no, or my answer would be no, and I'll demonstrate it. How do you feel when a police officer gets involved in a shady shooting or some sort of shady situation, and then that police officer's own police department says, well, we investigated him. Turns out he's perfectly fine. Nothing happened. Most people call foul when that happens. I think, and this makes me sick to say, the government is better at holding other entities accountable, not themselves. When it comes to holding themselves accountable, they do a terrible job. They sweep trillions under the rug. We leave entire caches of military stock in other countries that we've been at war with. We give billions of dollars to countries in the form of aid or war that we don't track where it goes. But when the government is responsible for holding me, the private landlord, accountable, well, they will either fine me or jail me if I don't play by the rules. That's a penalty that I have to respect. As much as I'm frustrated by the way the situation is set up, because sometimes I think the government is wrong in their judgments, they are better at holding others accountable than they are at holding themselves. If you transitioned housing away from a private landlord to government-run institutions like we had in the projects in New York back in the 70s and 80s, you'll end up with what they had back then. Slums, housing that was falling apart, never repaired properly. All these government officials couldn't fix the problem. And eventually, most of these programs were done away with. And what we've seen instead is a hybrid system where the government qualifies the tenant for the Section 8 program, then qualifies the landlord in their property as good enough to house that tenant, and then works as that intermediary, supposedly being unbiased, although I think biased in favor of the tenants, supposedly being unbiased to mitigate between the tenants and the landlords to make sure that everything is on the up and up when someone qualifies for that subsidy. However, moving all housing over to them totally defeats the argument of you being against landlords. You're just changing who the landlord is and then claiming that it's based in some difference in efficiency that you couldn't articulate.
So you are going to face the socialism versus capitalism argument when you
Absolutely.
have this debate. And then for anybody who's tuning in late, I have not lost my ever-loving mind. I am helping Millennial Mike at 1 o'clock in the morning in Portugal prep for a debate on should we abolish landlords. So I'm taking the con stance, if anyone is new. So, all right, well, let's take out the socialism versus capitalism. I would research that and have a really concise kind of here's where capitalism has won and here's where socialism has lost. Have those talking points ready. So let's just go to you've made a commodity of an essential life need of housing, and we've already talked about food is a need, transportation is a need, healthcare is a need, and so you correlated the two. But let's just go to supply, right? Just simple supply and demand. The more demand you create, the less supply there is to go around because of that demand. And if you own more than one house, it means that somebody else doesn't have one. But that's just the first step that you're going to hear. If somebody's really thought through their argument, they're also going to say the increased demand increases the cost to where that middle class family can't get on the property ladder. And it's not just the cost of the property by supply and demand. It's the cost to build, the cost to borrow the money to build, the cost to buy the materials to maintain it. Your HVAC, isn't $3,500 to replace because of the materials. It's about $400 worth of materials and about $500 worth of labor to swap out your motor, your motherboard, everything. But because landlords profit off of something that their tenants pay for, they have the money to pay a higher fee. Supply and demand dictates that price is based on what people are willing to pay. And since you have more people paying for the housing and the maintenance on the housing than the people using the product, it can be priced out for that average American family.
So you're correct when you say that landlords, of course, do add to the demand. In a basic supply-demand market graph, you would see supply of housing and demand for housing. Every landlord that comes to the market that creates demand for additional housing is affecting that price. That's absolutely true. Now, why this becomes such a heartache for most people, it's especially highlighted by what we're going through right now, which is housing unaffordability. Housing unaffordability is made up of three different prongs. Shout out to our boy Zuber. You've got wages, interest rates, and price, interest rates, and wages. Those are the three prongs of housing affordability. What can happen is we can have prices be low, but if interest rates are high, your monthly payment, which is typically how you get qualified for affordability, could be way out of whack. You could have super high prices like we did in 2021, but really low interest rates. And somehow more people were able to afford in 2021 than they were just a couple of years later when prices raised. Supply does affect the price. However, it's actually a lower contributing factor to the affordability of housing when compared to those other three margins. Landlords are affecting supply. But again, this is a system-wide argument that should point people towards limiting regulation on home builders. Just to put a shovel in the ground in Seattle, California, or pick your blue state could be $100,000. You didn't lay one brick. You're just getting the permits so that you can lay a brick. All of that adds to the cost of housing much more than individual landlords, in my opinion. Now, we can look at the actual breakdown of how many buyers each year are landlords versus individual homeowners. But ultimately, I think that the extreme regulation that exists in most of these markets makes it almost impossible for anybody to build affordable housing. Builders have had to start selling bigger houses at a higher price point in order to offset what they could have made a profit on if there weren't so many regulatory blockades in their way. And so again, this seems like a system-wide argument that should push people towards trying to figure out how to create more housing. One of the most popular graphs that illustrates the lack of supply, not caused by landlords, is a graph that my friend Dion from the channel Dion Talk loves to post. And it's that since the 1950s, every decade, we built 20 million housing units a decade until 2010. From 2010 to 2020, we only built 5 million. We underbuilt by 75% for that decade, which was only 15 years ago, or as recent as 5 years ago. And so what happened is we constrained supply coming out of the Great Recession. Then we've had a ton of market manipulation with interest rates and the C-19 issue. And what you get is an unaffordable housing market. And what's the easiest thing for people to point at? Oh, it must be these rich landlords over here. No, sorry, I really don't think that's the problem. I think that the government interfered in ways that they shouldn't. And we had a massive crash that put builders out of business. And then they screwed things over with interest rates. And they want to scapegoat the landlord, who has existed since the founding of this country in up markets and down markets. And we can't point to landlords causing a housing and affordability crisis at any other point. It's just a very convenient scapegoat today.
All right, this will be my culminating argument.
Okay.
A real life example of how landlords are making the system worse.
Sure.
Exactly.
I'm ready.
You ready? Okay.
I'm ready.
So Mike, I'll also recommend afterwards going back to Matt's channel and my channel and checking out the live comments. There's some really good comments in there on things that you might have said at a certain point in time, and just kind of check through those comments. So I appreciate all of the comments people are making, and understanding that this is a debate to help Mike prep for an actual debate with somebody who thinks all of this insanity that I'm spewing. So here's where landlords impact the market currently. Remote work is now more of an option than at any point in our lives, right? Before 2020, the average remote work job was about 13% of our population. So most of us knew maybe one or two people who landed that I can work from home job. I mean, a full-time work from home job, not some of the part-time jobs you can always do. During The pandemic in 2020, it peaked up to around 60% of people could work remotely full time. Now it's ticked down because some people are getting called back to the office to where 56% of people have to work in the office full time, leaving 44% of the people who can work remotely. So these people don't have to live in the cities anymore. They can move out of the city an hour away, hour and a half away, go to the office once or twice a week. They don't want to buy. They don't want to be owners because their bosses might call them back to the office. So what it's done is it's increased demand on rentals outside of cities. So the families, that middle class working family that doesn't live in the city, that doesn't have a remote job, that lives an hour away from the city because it's where they can afford it, can't afford the rent now because the rent demand of people working remote jobs has driven rents up so much that while they can't get on the property ladder because of the supply and demand issues, they now can't rent either. Where are they supposed to go? The person who can't work remotely, the person who is the truck driver, the massage therapist, the barber, it's pretty hard to do some of those jobs remotely. What's the solution, if not a government provided housing or a social program to take houses away from the greedy landlords who have a power imbalance? Right? We have rules at companies. You can't, as a sergeant at your department, date a subordinate. There's a power imbalance. We put checks and balances in all aspects of life. Why can't we put it when it comes to somebody can profit from a necessity like housing, and with remote work impacting it, it's now creating homeless families just outside of cities.
Once again, I can continually point the audience back to the fact that Dion makes very compelling emotional arguments, but he's making system-wide criticisms. You can blame the landlord, but are we also supposed to just blame an individual who's decided, I want to leave the expensive, overpriced city that I'm in and I want to move to a place that's more affordable for me? And so they move their dollars from California to Texas, from New York to Florida, or even just from the more urban city to a more rural area, maybe 45 minutes away. We're going to blame those people for exercising their freedom as an American to move and live wherever they want. This is a natural rebalancing that appears to be occurring right now. Maybe it's some form of the pendulum swinging where the prices in the cities have skyrocketed out of control. But now, thanks to the internet and thanks to remote work, some of those people are able to move away. Well, for every time you increase the price in a more rural area, the price in the city is actually decreasing. And so what we're seeing is that maybe some of these larger, more dense urban areas are coming down slightly in price while the more rural areas are going up as people can do more remote work. Ultimately, you would have to severely impact the freedom of the consumer to be able to choose to live where they want. Getting rid of the landlord does not ameliorate or fix this problem in any way. If landlords can't own property, well, then all that would happen is the people who live in the expensive cities would move out there and buy the property, and there would still be the increase in prices that wasn't there before. And ultimately, I still point people back to the primary service that landlords provide, which is that in almost all markets, at almost all times, it's cheaper to rent than to buy. And so if you were to remove landlords from the equation, these families who are potentially being pushed out of the market would certainly be pushed out of the market if they didn't have an option to rent and were forced only to be able to buy. Where's the money going to come from for them to do that? So we're critiquing an imperfect system here, and I can agree that there's imperfections about it. But the solution that you present, which would be to get rid of landlords and make it illegal, does not do anything except for exacerbate the problem and make it any worse, and make it even worse.
Sorry, Matt.
No, go ahead.
So every time you say it's
a
system, every time you say it's a system-wide problem, all I hear is we can't boil the ocean. So why start? It's a problem that needs fixed. So here's one more point that might be made by the person who's going to tell you why we don't need landlords. Up to this point, all we've been attacking is the people, the mom and pops who buy more houses than they need, more houses than they can live in, driving up the price, reducing the supply. What about those evil hedge funds out there that are buying properties left and right and by the tens of thousands, further reducing supply and demand, taking even away from the mom and pop landlords, the middle class working family? What would you say to those? What is the answer to hedge funds? If people say if we could stop hedge funds from buying all the properties, this is a very easy one for you to answer, hopefully. And you can get up behind the logic of if less hedge funds were buying houses, there'd be more houses for people to live in. Why can't you just take it one step farther and say if we got rid of landlords, there'd be more houses for people to buy, prices would be low enough so the average working family could qualify for that house? Well,
I'm curious to know why you think that would be an easy one to answer, but I'll give you what my answer would be. My
I'll give
answer
you
would
mine
be
afterwards.
sure. My answer would be no. I can actually understand the argument that BlackRock coming in and buying an entire giant neighborhood of housing so that the house was built and then turned immediately into a rental is putting home ownership further away from the reach of a common person because they didn't even have an option to bid on that house. It was already pre-sold before it was even built. So I can understand the problem there. I can understand the concerns there. I have yet to hear any piece of legislation or any proposition that even sounds remotely good in terms of restricting a hedge fund to be able to do that. If you just ban it completely outright, well, then we miss the benefit of what these companies do provide, and they do still provide benefit. So, for instance, the builders may not be able to build profitably, selling off 1, 2, 3, 4 here or there to individual buyers. They may actually only be profitable selling within that paradigm, given the current market. And so if we were to just create broad sweeping legislation that said it's now illegal for hedge funds to buy any rentals or to buy neighborhoods, well, there would definitely be some problems with that beyond the fact that it just goes against the free market capitalism that we as a country have decided that we believe is best for us. But I do think that there is an argument to be made for restriction. How exactly? I don't know exactly to what extent they should be restricted or some legislation should be introduced to limit what they can do. But I'm open to hearing that argument if someone's willing to make it.
Okay, so here's the answer that I have obviously failed and not made this video enough to where you just know this rhetoric, these facts.
Sure.
There's 3 reasons why hedge funds aren't the problem people think they are. The first one is the amount that they own is a myth. You ask anybody, they're going to say 25%, 50%, whatever. It's 3%. 3% of single family homes are owned by hedge funds. So it's a tiny amount, not impacting the market. The second thing is when they do build for rent, that's not taking a house off the market. That's creating a house that wasn't going to exist before. Taking a renter out of the market to put into there to create less demand on actual housing. And the third thing is most of those hedge funds are in almost every middle-class working family's retirement account. So the better that hedge fund does, the better the person's finances are going to be. So that's why I thought it would have been an easy one. I thought I made that video like every 2 months for the last 4 years. But hopefully this has helped you. Hopefully I didn't lose subscribers because they came in at that one moment when I was giving an emotional-based speech on here's why we need to get rid of landlords. I think
I
you'll
play
do
the Russian national anthem for you if you want.
nice. Yes, exactly.
I think generally speaking, I think that the approach, this approach can work. I take a completely different approach because I think people have no idea what they're talking about.
Mm.
And so my question to them is, what advantage as a landlord, when I bought my first property, what advantage do you believe I have that you don't have today? The answer is they don't have one. How much money does it cost to buy a home?
Oh, I know the advantage you had.
What's
you
that?
could use owner-occupied financing to purchase it with only 1 year requirement to live there.
Mhm.
If you want to remove
can
landlords from the house hacking scheme, it is owner-occupied lending for the length of the loan.
But I said the advantage. That's not an advantage for me. They had the same opportunity that I did. I didn't have any advantage. So I go down the path of advantages. What was the advantage that I have in buying the first property? I had no advantage over you. You had the only difference could be I'm more successful and I make more money. That's the only advantage that I can have. But that means that I earned that success and I did that job and I was paid more money for what I brought to value to a marketplace. And so I just start taking them down the path of what do you think it takes now today for you to buy a home? It's 3.5% down. I don't have that advantage. It costs me 25%. What advantage do you have when you move into this property as a renter and you decide to drop absolutely catastrophic shits in the toilet that I then have to take care of and I got to pay the plumber to come out there and clean out and take care of? Are you ready right now today to pay a $1,500 plumber bill?
Right.
So I think it's not only what is the opportunity that I have that they didn't get. I got no opportunity that they didn't get. I had a better job. I made more money because I added more value to the market.
Hmm.
And so I just want to walk them through that. 3.5% down on the first one. I had the same opportunity that you did. On the next one, I wasn't allowed to get 3.5% down. On the next one, I had to go with a conventional loan unless I had done something different and gotten out of my Fannie Freddie loan for that as my primary owner loan. which means I was putting 20 or 25% down. What's the advantage that I have to putting 20 or 25% down? So I think that very often, I think that people think that the other guy has an advantage when there's no actual advantage.
Mhm.
I had no advantage. They had exactly the same program available to them that I had to me. And the second one, I was actually being penalized because I already owned one. So landlords don't have it easier. We have it harder. We're being penalized for already owning an asset where we're already creating affordable housing for somebody that couldn't afford to buy the house themselves because they didn't have the credit, they didn't have the credentials, or they didn't have the cash.
Yeah.
Dion, you
So
can
here's what
refute that too, by the way.
What's that?
You can refute that too, by the way. I don't
Oh,
know.
no, I'm not refuting that. You made great points. That was the whole point of us being here.
Yeah.
I didn't believe anything that I used in this debate today.
No, of
The point
course.
is you should
No,
be
of
able to
course.
speak with confidence in something that you
Yes.
know is complete BS.
Yeah.
Mike, so I think you should do the same thing. And so your interview is May 8th. You have a little bit of prep time. Maybe take a week, go through the cesspool of research that it took to here's my talking points on why we should abolish landlords, and realize that there are literally millions of people who think this nonsense to the point where you can articulate them, right? Have the debate again, maybe against Matt, maybe against me, maybe against
Both of us.
Tia, whoever, it doesn't matter. And when you, because it's that Socratic method of debate, if you could speak your opponent's viewpoint to the point where they're satisfied, then you can debate it.
Right.
That way you're less likely to get hit with something out of left field. Like my favorite argument, it's actually much easier to buy a house today than it was in 2000.
Correct.
And I can prove it. I've done it in videos. I've proven it.
Yep.
And I say that and people just get all emotional, bottlenecked. I get them right into the choke point and I control the way we go.
Dion, don't you think that if the conversation is all very feeling based and
Which
not
is what it's going to be. Why I came at Mike that
absolutely. No,
way.
1,000%.
Debate emotions, and that's what they're going to do.
Correct. And that's why you just have to get to the core of the numbers, Mike. Like factually today, if you and I both go out, we both go and try and buy a home and we don't own a home. The only way that I beat you is if I make more money and I've taken better care of my credit. That's the only way I'm in a better position than you are. That means that I have a better chance of buying the home that you do. That's the only way. It's the only way. And that means that I've brought more value to society because society pays me more or a company pays me more based on the value that I bring to them. I just think that the 3.5% down, we have no advantages there. We only have the opportunity on part 2, which is I'm penalized for owning the asset. I have to pay 25%, where you get to pay a third as much, and you still get the same opportunity that I do. But you get to only pay a third. You get to only pay, a seventh. Why do you get to pay a seventh what I get to pay, and you get access to the same thing that I get access to, but you get on for a seventh? That's not fair. So landlords are penalized.
Right. Yeah.
But that's just my.
Are they penalized? Because the person who doesn't understand the economics very much is going to say, with your larger down payment, you're going to cash flow better. You're going to have a better equity position. I'm forced as a first-time home buyer in this. Since you're buying one with 25% down and have the ability to it, there's one less in the supply, which makes my 3% down even more. They're just, they can come back at every one of those. So it is get to the numbers, get away from the emotion. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's where you win anything like this is, because they feel a certain way. They think a certain way based on feelings, not based on facts.
Right.
So there's a quick thing here from Chester from the comments.
Yes.
Chris Voss, who wrote Never Split the Difference, he's asking, Mike, if you've listened to it. Chris Voss is actually presenting with me at BPCon this year. He's one of the other speakers. So he's a former FBI. He was actually going to be the keynote speaker for BPCon last year, but it was in Mexico. Oh. And because of his background in the FBI, he can't go there.
I wouldn't go there either if I was him.
Right. Nope. So looking forward to meeting him in person, because I've actually looked at quite a bit of the work that he's done.
He's awesome. Yeah. He's awesome.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Then there's a comment here from Summertime Santa. What about landlords can just raise the rent as much as they want anytime? Mike, how would you debate that? What about landlords who can raise the rent as much as they want? How about that binder strategy where they get the tenant to ask their rent to go up 30 or 40%?
Yeah, I think
What's your
that's one of the
answer?
most easily debunked ones, like as you talked about earlier, just using math or facts. And the fact is that if I buy a rental unit, pick any market in the country, you pick in Seattle, Washington, you pick Miami, Florida. If I look up what the average rent is for a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house, it's probably in Seattle, it's probably somewhere around $2,500 to $3,000 a month. If I buy a very expensive rental and I say, oh, I got to pay my mortgage of $5,000, I can list my unit for $5,000. But if all the other units are listed for $2,500, nobody's going to buy that. And that's why you end up seeing rent prices on units for rent typically follow into some sort of average. They're all typically within certain parameters. And everybody who scrolled through rent has seen one that they went, why the heck is that so expensive? Or wait, that's really, really cheap. Is this a scam? Because we can automatically decipher what the average is just from looking at a set of data for just a few seconds even. And so as much as a landlord may say to themselves, gosh, I wish I could just charge $10,000 a month in rent because, well, I'd only need one rental unit then. I could just live. My mortgage is $2,000. I charge $10,000. I profit $8,000. That's not actually how it works. The market's going to find equilibrium, and that landlord is going to be forced to drop their price continually until it finally comes down to a point people are willing to rent.
Sounds like a free market to me.
Yeah.
Okay. You brought up a touch point that you might want to be prepared to answer.
Sure.
How about those landlords that put their rent out there for so much and nobody rents it, so they just keep the unit empty, literally taking a unit away from home buyers and renters because it makes more sense for them to keep it vacant?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a good argument. I think that we do want to contribute to the housing market in a way that provides more rental units. Most landlords, almost every landlord that I know, I interact with thousands of them. If you look up landlord content, I don't know any popular YouTubers or popular real estate investing courses that would tell you to intentionally keep a unit vacant as a means to make money. I know of nobody who preaches that. Now, does that mean that there aren't some people out there? I've heard of lots of foreign nationals from China who will just buy vacant houses and leave them vacant because they're trying to shelter their money from oppressive governments. But again, that's still pretty rare. That's not the norm. What percentage of all landlords that is, my guess would be very, very small. I don't recommend it. I don't practice it. And so I think you're just grasping at a fringe issue here. And ultimately, it's a free market. If someone wants to do something like that, it's bad business, but they have the choice to do it if they want to.
So you don't own a home because you couldn't get access to the $25 million penthouse that the Chinese nationalist owns?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. The guy who's sheltering millions of dollars escaping Hong Kong. Yeah, he's your competition for a median house.
Yeah, he's trying to buy that house on the corner of whatever and go F yourself way in Gary, Indiana.
Right.
You caught him. He's the one.
So the first question here is, Mike, are you still buying in Gary, Indiana?
I haven't bought anything since last year. I've been remodeling stuff and renting it out. And the common problem that I've actually had that I've been talking about now for a few months is the bottleneck when it comes to finding good tenants. Because I'm very strict with the tenants that I want, because the last thing I want to do is just put someone in there and then go through an eviction or unpayment. It may as well have stayed vacant anyways. And so finding good tenants is the bottleneck point. I'm not interested in buying anything else until I finish all my existing projects. But I'm also not against if someone asks me, hey, should I buy in Gary? Well, yeah, Gary is still a good city to buy in. But you just have to be aware of the fact that the strategy that I think works best, I had moved towards 3-4 unit buildings. They're tough to rent to Section 8 renters because that Section 8 renter has a voucher. The voucher says 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom. Well, if you were a tenant, would you rather have a 3-bedroom house or be in a 3-bedroom unit in a 4-plex? They want the 3-bedroom house. And if there's houses out there available, that's what they're going to pick. And so my advice to people would be, if you're going to buy something, single family houses do really well. If you want to do Section 8 rentals, if you want to do private market, which again, you have to have very strict standards, because the private market, they don't have a voucher. They're going off of price and also what their personal preference is. So they're more sensitive to price than a Section 8 person is. And so if you're going to do 2, 3, 4 unit buildings, you're probably going to have to rent to non-Section 8 tenants, which means that in order to get the qualified tenants, you're going to want to be below what the market value is. I know, crazy, a landlord recommending that you rent slightly below what the market value is. And my advice for why you would do that is so that you get an influx of tenants and hopefully can find a good qualified one, because settling for a bad tenant will kill your investment.
I concur.
So I'm going to ask a favor of everybody who's watching on Lumberjack's channel or on my channel. Not during the live, but after the live, people watching in Futureland. Leave a comment below. Mike is debating this on a platform that isn't going to have people who've been watching the content for years, who've been buying rentals, who are wanting to reach financial freedom by putting their money to work. On that platform, if somebody came and they were completely neutral, didn't care about landlords, didn't care about renters, didn't have an opinion, and they listened to my arguments and Mike's arguments, which way do you think they would lean at the end of the video?
I don't think minds are getting changed. I think that people, the feelings, they're too entrenched in their feelings and they don't want to hear the logic. If somebody's going into it with an open mind, actually looking to research this and doesn't really know where they come down on it, I think that if they listen to both sides, I think that they'll see one side is logical and one side is feeling based. But I think that most people, that's why I think having the argument about feelings of government and government overreach and things like that, talk to me practically about how this impacts me as a human tomorrow and what steps I can take to change things. You know, but I'm broken that way. I have no interest. I'm not going to put the system on trial because I don't give a rip. You know, it's like, what are you supposed to do? Change the system as a person, or 10,000 people, or even 1 million people? Those 1 million person marches do nothing.
Right.
Except for leave litter behind. That's all they do. They're completely useless.
There's some good overtime if you're a cop, usually.
Yeah, it's true. And the food vendors do really well.
That's right.
But
That's right.
they're just a punchline, and they always have been, and they always will be. So at the end of the day, that doesn't force change. No one's paying attention to you. Just isn't. So practically today, what step can I take? What can I do today where all of a sudden I have an advantage over you? And P.S., by the way, there's a reason why you don't own anything. It's because you live in paycheck to paycheck like 70% of the other people out there. And you know what? And then give them the math. Because I did this with somebody I was having the argument with. I said, let me help you out. You have a $400,000 home that you want to buy. You can't even think about owning that thing, right? Like, no, what are you, crazy? I don't have $400,000. Did you know that it actually only takes 3.5%? And even better, you can actually ask for that 3.5% credit back, add it to the value of the home, and actually come to the table with no closing costs. Did you know that? And so, very largely speaking, people that think that the system is stacked against them, they're just ignorant, uninformed, and lazy in a bad way.
They listen to the news, and the news says the housing market's bad, you'll never be able to buy, and they believe it.
Yeah, they're lazy in a bad way. Dion's lazy in a good way.
That's right.
Exactly. Well, I hope this helped, Mike. It's 1:30 in the morning here in Portugal, and the clubs close at 4. So I have limited time left to go out and entertain myself.
We wouldn't want to keep you from that. Anybody who watched, thanks for watching, guys. I do appreciate it. The debate will be May 8th, 6 p.m. Pacific. It's on a YouTube channel called The Raging Tomato. She's a nice lady. She hosts a ton of different debates on a bunch of different social topics, political issues. So if you want to watch it that night, I'll post some links on my Instagram. You can follow the link there. Would love to see a few people that are on my side in the chat. It's a somewhat conservative audience and also somewhat liberal audience. There's a pretty decent split. So I anticipate plenty of haters and probably some people who are supportive. But I don't anticipate a landlord-educated audience like the ones that we have. So anybody who wants to be there would love to have you.
Guys, make sure you are there. This is a no-brainer that you put on your calendar. Make sure you're there. Mike, when is it again?
May 8th. I'll be at 6 p.m. Pacific on The Raging Tomato. Yeah.
Awesome.
Dion, don't get too drunk.
We take
2.5 hours left. Yeah.
David gets his night. I get my night. We rotate. One of us will make sure we know where we are.
Awesome. And guys, for those of you who don't know, yes, this was my live stream for tonight. I wanted to make sure to do this with Mike and with Dion. So there will not be a live stream tonight in a half an hour. Going to go hang out with my wife for a change and lick my wounds after an awful, horrible, no good week, because I felt every ounce of being a landlord this week. And it's the bird to everybody. So Mike, have a great night. Thanks for helping. Dion, have fun, be safe. And we'll see you guys in the next one.
See you guys.
Bye.
Ciao.